The word hell appears 54 times in the King James Bible. It appears 0 times in the original Hebrew. Not once, not in a different form, not implied. 0. The ancient Hebrews had a word for where the dead go. They used it constantly in the Psalms, in Job, in Ecclesiastes. That word is Sheol, and Sheol is not hell. It never was. It's a dim, silent place where everyone goes, the righteous and the wicked alike. No fire, no torture, no devil with a pitchfork, just silence and dust. So where did hell come from? That's not a theological question. It's a historical one, and the answer is stranger than the doctrine. To understand how hell got into the Bible, you need to understand what happened to the Jews between the 6th century BC and the 1st century AD. In 586 BC, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, the temple, the kingdom, everything the Jews had been promised. They were deported, scattered, and forced to rebuild their identity from scratch inside a foreign empire. That exile changed everything, including their theology. Before Babylon, the Hebrew conception of death was simple and bleak. Everyone goes to Sheol, the just, the unjust, kings and slaves. Sheol is not punishment, it's just the end, a shadow of life, not a continuation of it. After Babylon, the Jews encountered Persian thought, specifically Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism had something the Hebrew tradition didn't, a strict cosmic dualism. Light versus darkness, a good God and an evil one. Heaven for the righteous, a place of punishment for the wicked. A final judgment that sorted souls into permanent categories. This wasn't a sudden conversion, it was a slow absorption. Over centuries under Persian rule, then Greek rule, then Roman rule, Jewish theology began to develop something it had never had before, an afterlife with consequences. The vehicle for that development wasn't mainstream Judaism. It was the apocalyptic literature, texts like 1 Enoch, written between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC, which described in vivid detail a place of fire where fallen angels and the wicked would be imprisoned after the final battle. That place had a name already familiar to every Jew in Jerusalem: Ge-Hinnom. Ge-Hinnom, the Valley of the Son of Hinnom. It's a real place. You can visit it today. It sits just southwest of Jerusalem's old city walls, a narrow ravine that curves below the hill where the temple once stood. In the 7th century BC, it was the site of something that would have been unthinkable to later generations: child sacrifice. The prophet Jeremiah records that the kings of Judah burned their sons and daughters in the fire there in an act of worship to the god Moloch. King Josiah eventually desecrated the site to stop the practice, but the memory didn't fade. By the time of Jesus, Ge-Hinnom had become something else entirely. The valley was Jerusalem's refuse dump, a place where fires burned continuously to consume the city's waste, where the bodies of executed criminals were sometimes thrown, where, it was said, the worms never stopped. You can see why the image stuck. When the authors of apocalyptic literature needed a symbol for divine punishment, a place that embodied horror, fire, and the rejection of God, they reached for the name every Jew already associated with defilement and burning: Gehenna, Ge-Hinnom, the valley outside the city where nothing clean was meant to go. Jesus uses this word 12 times in the Gospels. Not Sheol, not Hades, Gehenna. It is better for you to enter life maimed than with 2 hands to go into Gehenna, into the unquenchable fire. Mark 9:43. The question is whether he was describing a literal post-mortem location or invoking a symbol that every person in his audience would have recognized immediately, the way a New Yorker today understands what it means to be thrown in the gutter. There are 4 distinct words that English Bibles routinely translate as hell. They are not synonyms. They don't even belong to the same conceptual universe. Sheol. In Hebrew, the underworld, appears 65 times in the Old Testament. Neutral, universal. Every human being goes there. Job, David, the righteous, the wicked. It is described as a place of silence, dust, and shadow. There is no punishment in Sheol. There is barely any consciousness. The King James Bible translates it as hell 31 times and as grave 31 times, for the same word in the same book, depending apparently on context or translator preference. Hades, the Greek equivalent of Sheol, used in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, to render Sheol, also used in the New Testament. Like Sheol, Hades in its original Greek conception is not a place of punishment. It is simply the realm of the dead. The New Testament uses it 10 times. The KJV translates all 10 as hell. Gehenna, derived from Ge-Hinnom, used 12 times in the New Testament, always by Jesus except once. This is the closest the New Testament comes to what we now call hell, a place of fire associated with judgment. But its origin is geographical and symbolic, not cosmological. Tartarus appears exactly once in the New Testament, in 2 Peter 2:4, to describe where fallen angels are imprisoned awaiting judgment. It's borrowed directly from Greek mythology, where Tartarus was the deepest pit of the underworld below Hades, reserved for the Titans. The KJV translates this single occurrence as hell. 4 words, 4 completely different concepts, 1 translation. That is not a minor translation issue. That is a theological decision embedded in the text itself. A decision made by translators working within a tradition that had already decided what the afterlife looked like. The traditional reading is coherent on its own terms. Jesus speaks of Gehenna with urgency. Matthew 25:46 uses kolasin aeonian, eternal punishment, in direct parallel with zoen aeonian, eternal life. If one is eternal, the argument goes, so is the other. Augustine systematized this in the 4th century. The medieval church built on it. Dante gave it a face, and that face has dominated Western imagination ever since. The textually supported reading is more complicated. The evidence suggests that what we call hell is a composite, assembled over centuries from at least 4 different sources: Hebrew Sheol, the apocalyptic Gehenna, Greek Hades and Tartarus, and the Zoroastrian dualism that entered Jewish theology during and after the Babylonian exile. The medieval doctrine of eternal conscious torment is not found intact in any single source. It was constructed. My own reading, and I want to be clear, this is where I leave the evidence and offer an interpretation, is that the most honest position is also the most uncomfortable one. The original texts are genuinely ambiguous, not because the authors were careless, but because they were working with images and symbols that carried meaning for their specific audiences in specific historical moments. When those images get flattened into a single English word and handed to readers 20 centuries later, something essential is lost, and something that was never there gets added. The hell most people fear today is not in the Bible. It's in Dante. Here is where the 3 positions actually break down under pressure. The traditional position rests heavily on the symmetry argument. Eternal life and eternal punishment in Matthew 25:46 must mean the same thing. But aionios in the Septuagint is used to describe the Levitical priesthood, the Mosaic dietary laws, and the fire that destroyed Sodom. All of those ended. If aionios can describe things that demonstrably terminated, the symmetry argument is not as airtight as it appears. The annihilationist position, that the wicked are simply destroyed rather than tormented, handles most of the Old Testament comfortably. Romans 6:23, "The wage of sin is death, not eternal suffering." But it has to contend with Revelation 20:10, which describes the devil being tormented day and night forever and ever. That's hard to read as annihilation. The annihilationist typically responds that Revelation is apocalyptic literature, and its imagery should not be read literally, which is a defensible position, but it requires applying a standard of non-literal reading selectively, which opens its own problems. The universalist position, associated with Origen in the 3rd century and with theologians like Hans Urs von Balthasar in the 20th, argues that a God who is both omnipotent and genuinely desires all to be saved, 1 Timothy 2:4, cannot ultimately fail. The traditional response is free will. God does not override human choice. The universalist presses back. Can a finite human being with finite understanding sustain a free rejection of infinite goodness for eternity? At some point, the argument goes, the will must yield to reality. None of these positions is without cost. The traditionalist must explain why God actively sustains conscious suffering forever. The annihilationist must explain Revelation 20. The universalist must explain why Jesus spoke of Gehenna with what reads in context as genuine urgency, not as a pastoral metaphor designed to eventually dissolve. What remains unresolved is this: the tension between divine justice and divine mercy is not a translation problem. It was there before Dante. It was there before Augustine. It is embedded in the texts themselves, and no theological system has cleanly dissolved it. They have each chosen which side of the tension to prioritize, and then called that choice orthodoxy. There is a reading of this entire history that has nothing to do with theology. Every culture that has ever existed has produced a version of the underworld. Sheol, Hades, Tartarus, Duat, Naraka, Gehenna, Helheim. The details differ, the geography differs, but the structure is always the same, a place that reflects back what the living most fear: abandonment, meaninglessness, the consequences of a life badly lived. The hell you were taught to fear may not be in the original text, but the psychological reality it points to is older than any of those texts. In Jungian terms, it is the shadow, the rejected, unintegrated parts of the self that accumulate in the dark until they demand confrontation. Joseph Campbell called it the belly of the whale, the descent that every hero must make before transformation is possible. My own reading, drawing on Hermetic philosophy rather than Christian theology, is that hell is not a place, it is a state. the lower pole of conscious experience, produced by disconnection from what the Hermetic tradition calls the all, the underlying unity of existence. It is not eternal because nothing in that framework is fixed. Everything can be transmuted. Those who understand the laws use them to ascend. Those who don't live inside their effects, and that, depending on how long it lasts, can look very much like hell. That reading is mine. It is not in the Bible, but it is, I think, pointing at the same thing the ancient writers were pointing at, before the translators, the councils, and the artists got there first. The word hell appears 54 times in the King James Bible. It appears 0 times in the original Hebrew. What appears in the original is something more honest and, in a way, more disturbing. A set of images that different people, in different centuries, under different empires, reached for when they tried to describe what it looks like when a human being, or a civilization, moves completely away from what is good. Whether that process ends, whether it can be reversed, whether it is punishment or consequence, or simply the natural result of certain choices, the texts don't agree. The traditions don't agree. The translators chose for you. The question worth sitting with is not whether hell exists, it's why every culture that has ever existed needed it to.